back to the whole thing, right? I'm far from a racist. I have a black wife, actually. Well, what I'm saying is the one thing I always hate that always gets misconstrued, and I used to say it in school too, and I used to be told to be quiet, I guess, is we leave out the part of, I feel like we've all been manipulated by the same person, by the people who do whatever. We're all manipulated because how did we get slaves in the first place? It's not like a bunch of light-skinned, blue-eyed people jumped off a ship where they never been before in Africa and started capturing people. You had kings who caught other tribes and sold their own people. That's a big misconception that everybody seems to leave out of history for some reason that I don't understand.
I see. Is that it?
Well, what I'm saying is that goes to relation. What's the worst thing today? It's black on black crime. So it even stems back to kings catching their own and selling them to the white man.
Okay, whenever someone chooses to preface a comment in a public forum by saying I am not, by defining himself, by what he is not, it usually does not end well. You know, when you begin a conversation by saying I am far from being a racist, I have a black wife. I mean, you know,
nowadays,
I mean, that
you have to say that nowadays, though, because you have people calling up saying altercations are racist no matter what or what we think.
Right.
So
well,
I have to start a conversation that way for you to do that.
But no, actually, no, you don't. No, okay, no, you don't. You don't have to start the conversation that way at all. At least not in this forum. In this forum, I begin every conversation by giving every caller the benefit of every doubt, and it is entirely up to you, the impression that you eventually leave at the end of that exchange. But you begin by having the benefit of every conceivable doubt. Now, just let me say this: it is not true to say that the role of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade is something that has not been or is not discussed publicly. In fact, Professor Henry Louis Gates up at Harvard is maybe the person who is singularly most associated with the public discussion of that issue, and he has written extensively, both in scholarly as well as in general market media, about this, and has been very roundly criticized, in fact, by some, including some in the academy, who believe that he has overplayed the significance of that component in the transatlantic slave trade. However, that having been said, here is the thing about the transatlantic slave trade. In every society in all of human history, slavery has existed. However, the transatlantic slave trade was unique in the annals of human history because it was the first time in human history, that slavery was color-coded, as Professor John Henry Clark explains. You've always had slavery in all societies as long as human beings have been around. But it was the first time that slavery was color-coded so that, and in the case of the United States, actually written into the Constitution, where we have provisions in our Constitution that specifically say that you can continue to import slaves until 1808. So they're sitting there in Philadelphia in 1787, drawing up a constitution, and within that constitution they write in that, look, you can continue to bring in slaves until 1808, because of course the slave trade was a very important part of the economy of several of the states, and in fact became an intrinsic part, a fundamental part of the economy of the entire United States, because while the South was where most of the slaves were physically located and doing the work, the insurance and the shipping and the shipbuilding and the banking and the commerce and so on generated by the wealth from the slave trade, by the wealth from slavery, the commerce and banking and so on and insurance and whatnot, those things were that was the business of the North, so that the North was very much a beneficiary of the institution of slavery, even in those states where slavery had been abolished prior to 1865. But in addition to that, chattel slavery which is the buying and selling of people and the situation in which people were stripped of all human dignity, forbidden to speak their language. They were not allowed to have families, where they could be bought and sold and traded, where they could be experimented upon, as Harriet Washington has written about in Medical Apartheid, where they were being used as lab rats and guinea pigs for the benefit of medical science and so on. That kind of slavery, the unique horrors of that crime against humanity that was the transatlantic slave trade, and the scale on which it occurred. By some estimates, there were at least 12 million people who were caught up in that slave trade. Some say 20 million, and you also have millions who died, who perished because of the inhuman transatlantic conditions in which they were held and transported and so on. So once you get into this business of enslavement of Africans and the transatlantic slave trade, you're dealing with a crime against humanity on an entirely different plane from anything that has existed either before or since.
I understand that.
No, you obviously don't.
My thing was, though, is from us as young children who are learning this through school, though, why is this big part left out, though?
Why is which part left out?
It's a big maybe we could see, hey, it's a big collectiveness of humanity of, wait, that was a big mess up. Everybody messed up there. Let's all stop this. Like, I wasn't back then. I didn't have slaves either. No one had that. That's what I'm saying. Like,
listen. Okay, stop. Listen, stop. Okay. Here's the thing.
Any kid in school.
Listen, sir, here's how this works. You call me, and then you say something, then I get to say something, and then you get to say something, and so on, and then eventually we've said what we've had to say, and the conversation comes to an end, and I move on. But you don't talk when I'm talking. That's a no-no. Now, I would recommend that you that you read a book called Complicity, which deals with that question of the way in which northern states were able to benefit from the slave trade. And in that book also, you will be introduced to this other question that you are bringing to the table now, which is that you personally did not live in that time, and therefore you don't have any personal culpability. Well, this is.
I really do not mean to interrupt you.
Okay, yeah,
You still didn't answer my question from the beginning.
Which is what? Which is what?
The question of why that is left out. Why no one knows that. Why that's not a big
Sir,
deal.
but I began by saying to you, stop. Okay, listen to hear this. I began my response to you by saying it is not true to say that the role of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade has been left out of the public account and the historical record and the public teaching on this subject. And I cited specifically the work of Professor Henry Louis Gates, and I don't want to start naming 5, 6, half a dozen scholars, but I cited specifically the work of Professor Henry Louis Gates, and you can just simply put his name, put Africans in African slave trade and Henry Louis Gates in your search engine, and you'll come up with a plethora of articles and references on this subject. It is not true to say that has been left out.
I have to search for it.
You cannot hold. You cannot hold.
That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say the literature that is taught and given to us is not taught that. I have to go search that. That's why I know it, because I went and searched it myself, like you're talking about.
Okay, I have one question for you.
Why this stuff that's given to us is not given to us?
Okay, I have one question for you, and then you have the last word. What is the fugitive slave? What is the fugitive slave law or the Fugitive Slave Act? Were you taught that?
No, I wasn't.
No, you were not. Okay, good. Do you know that in our Constitution there is something called a fugitive slave provision, which allows for any person who owned slaves, to recover those slaves once they were able to escape and move into a free state. Were you aware of that?
No, it was not.
Okay, good. It's called the fugitive. Okay, it's called the fugitive slave provision, and it's of the U.S. Constitution. It says, no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. It's archaic language. Basically what it means is that notwithstanding states' rights, if a person is being held in slavery in some southern state and manages to escape and come to New York, for example, that the person who owned that person could lay claim to that escaped person in New York, and the state of New York would be obliged to return that person back to his slave master. Now, I mention this because just as an example of one more thing that we were not taught, as you said. There's a great deal that we have not been taught, which is why life is a process of continuing education, and it is a good thing that you have gone out and sought additional enlightenment and education and information on this issue, and I would hope that you would continue to do so. I think we all have an obligation to go out there and try to expand the range of our knowledge on these issues of public interest. So you have the last word now, and then I'm going to move on.
All right. I want to say thank you, first of all, for giving me literature to look up and to research. If I was disrespectful to you in any way, I didn't mean to be. I'm sorry. And my last thing I would like to say is I look into a lot of that stuff. A lot of things I'm into is monetary system. And if people want to help the middle class, you want to help yourself, I say you look into physical silver, not stocks, something like that. I'm talking about buying physical silver.
Yeah.
If you look up debt crisis, Mike Maloney, it's the easiest way to save the middle class. Every other country out there is telling their people to buy silver and gold except America because we are the reserve currency. Just please search physical silver, you yourself, and spread it out to the people. Watch Debt Crisis, Mike Maloney, Why Gold, Silver, Mike Maloney. The only thing that's